What is going on, guys? It's Yoji. If you are wondering how much life and defenses you need at which point while leveling, either in hardcore or if you are a softcore player with the ambition of dying as little as possible, this guide got you covered. I will give you some general tips on leveling, on when to upgrade your gear, what stats to look out for in leveling equipment, and when it's time to get more defenses or when you will need more damage. This is a question I was asked a lot recently, so I decided to make a video about it. And let me start it off by telling you, I only really care for 3 stats while leveling: my damage, my life pool, and my resistances. The damage you do and how fast you clear monsters often depends on the build you are playing, but let me give you some general benchmarks. For the most part, after Act 1 normal, you should be able to kill all but the tankiest normal monsters in 1 or 2 hits with your AoE ability. Rare monsters, which have yellow names, can take a little longer, but they should never feel like a huge pain to deal with. Rare monsters taking forever to kill is a clear sign that you need more damage, or a better single target setup. If you are lacking damage as an attacking build such as an archer, or any melee character swinging some sort of stick or blade at your foes, look to upgrade your weapon whenever your damage starts to feel slow. If you are really unlucky and can't find an upgrade, you can always use the physical damage recipe to upgrade a good base weapon. Selling a blacksmith whetstone, together with a rustic sash, and the weapon you want to upgrade, gives you back a weapon with increased physical damage. As a spellcaster, the gem levels are the base of your damage. Make sure you always level up your gems as you go. And weapons with the mod +1 to levels of socketed gems can be obtained using a vendor recipe. Sell a blue wand or scepter with an orb of alteration and an elemental resistance ring to any of the vendors in game to get a weapon back that has +1 to the level of gems of the respective element. In all cases, picking up a few damage nodes on the passive tree will be needed as well. Just make sure you pick up the right type of damage passives, as damage scaling in Path of Exile can sometimes be a little unintuitive. Just look up how to best scale the damage of your skill on the Path of Exile wiki. Oh, and try not to focus on critical strikes early on while leveling. Crit only really starts to work later in the game, because it has very high gear requirements. And no matter what class you play, linking up your main attack with appropriate support gems will be key to keep your damage output up to par. In Act 1, after beating Brutus, the first set of support gems becomes available, and you should immediately take one of them and link it to your main skill. For most physical damage attacks, added fire damage is a very good choice. Some projectile skills will benefit greatly from lesser multiple projectiles, often called LMP. And many spells can use added lightning or added cold until better gems become available. From Act 2 normal onwards, after completing the Sharp and Cruel quest, one should also start using a second support gem from among the ones available from the quest. Frequently used ones are faster casting and controlled destruction for spellcasters, or faster attacks and melee physical damage for melee attackers. Bow users would use faster attacks and physical projectile attack damage, for example. Near the end of Act 3, the elemental penetration gems become available after completing the quest Fixture of Fate at the library. Those are a must for most builds, dealing purely damage of one single element. From this point on, you should try to find a 4-link item to put your main skill gem into. As you progress into Act 4 and beat Kaum and Arreso, the last set of very powerful support gems becomes available, such as Increased Area of Effect, Multi-Strike, Spell Echo, and Chain. If you are not linking 3 support gems to your main skill by this point, you should definitely make that a priority for your next upgrade. A 5-link you only really need once you start going into maps though, so don't worry about that yet. Also, try to use auras and buffs while leveling. Those will reserve a part of your mana while you are using them, but reserving around half of your mana is usually not a problem at all. In Act 2 you gain access to Herald of Ice, Thunder, and Ash. Herald of Ash is great for physical builds, either using bows or melee attacks, and physical spells such as Ethereal Knives or Bladefall. Herald of Thunder and Ice are mainly used by elemental builds, such as most spellcasters. In Act 3, a physical build can replace the Herald of Ash by the Hatred Aura, or you can try running both if your mana sustain allows it. Wrath is great for lightning spellcasters, and Anger replaces Herald of Ice and Thunder for most fire spellcasters at this point. Now for defenses. I have certain thresholds and rule of thumb values I try to meet while progressing through the game. Before Act 3 normal, I usually do not care much for defenses at all, although I admit getting a large life flask for Brutus really does help, and having a little bit of cold resistance for Merveil does not hurt either, especially if you are still new to the game. But the first time I usually check my resistances is before Piety in the Crematorium in Act 3. Having around 50% or higher lightning resistance helps out a lot in that fight. And also in the upcoming zones, as the sewer zones will have dischargers who deal a lot of lightning damage, as well as the Battlefront and Ebony Barrack zones, which have lightning spellcasters. At the next encounter with Piety in Lunaris Temple, I usually try to have around 50% in cold, fire and lightning resistance, as she deals pretty high damage of all three elements. The next check I do before fighting Dominus in the Scepter of God, where I usually try to get as close to 1000 life and 75% lightning resistance as possible without too much investment, as it is still normal difficulty and you don't want to overinvest into gear at this point. I also usually upgrade my life flasks to Colossal at this point, and look to have one flask of Staunching among them to remove bleed effects. Next up we have Act 4. For Kaum and the area before the boss fight, I try to get as close to 75% fire resistance as possible, which makes the fight and the area a lot easier. With capped fire resistance at 75 as well as 50% lightning and cold resistance, you should be set for the rest of normal difficulty, including the final boss encounter, Malachi. I usually aim for around 1.2k life for the final boss fight in normal difficulty. And this is also where I want at least one instant recovery life flask. Especially in hardcore, crafting such a flask is transmutes and even alterations well spent in my opinion. I apply the same goals for elemental resistances in cruel difficulty. Just be aware that there is a resistance penalty in cruel and an even higher one in merciless difficulty. Life pool wise, I aim for 2000 life at cruel Dominus, around 2.4k life at cruel Malachi, and roughly 3000 life for Merciless Dominus, before progressing further into Dried Lake and maps. Having a little bit more than that when playing a melee character certainly does not hurt though. And if you are wondering how to factor in Energy Shield with that, I usually try not to rely on Energy Shield too much while leveling, as in some situations it can be hard to find the time to recharge it. As far as armor and evasion goes, it is nice to have while leveling, but I do not usually look too much for those stats before I start getting closer to maps. Later in the game those become very important though, and the same is true for chaos resistance. If there are any parts of the game you still struggle with after watching this, or if you had trouble as a new player, feel free to ask any questions in the comments section below. And if this video helped you out, feel free to subscribe or check out my channel for more Path of Exile guides. I am Yoji, and I will see you soon.